Thanks so much for your time. I am Pius Kojo Baka. Let's now settle for our stories. President Akufo-Addo has assured organized labor that the executive will work closely with the legislature to pass the new labor laws this year before his tenure ends. Now, the president is hopeful the law will help address labor disputes quickly and help set fair and appropriate wages for workers. President Akufo-Addo was addressing workers at this year's May Day celebration here in Accra.
Though today marks my final day, my final May Day address to organized labor as President of the Republic, having served by January the 7th, 2025, the constitutionally permitted allotment of 2 terms of 4 years each. I want to assure you that this, however, will not be my last encounter with organized labor. In the coming months, there will be a series of engagements with organized labor aimed at promoting peace, stability, and social cohesion. Personally, I look forward to interacting with you once again at the 2nd edition of the National Labor Conference, scheduled for some time later this year. Such occasions offer unique opportunities for representatives of government, employers, and organized labor to have dispassionate discussions on accelerating economic growth for national development. This is critical, and I'm happy that the conference is high on the agenda of tripartite constituents. Ensuring peaceful elections for national development also requires government to strengthen the policy, legislative, and institutional framework of labor administration.
Meanwhile, the General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress, Dr. Anthony Yaaah, has once again bemoaned the low wages paid workers, particularly workers in the private sector. This is said translates into small pension benefits when workers go on retirement.
Comrades, we are celebrating this May Day at the time Ghanaian workers and their families are grappling with high cost of living and inflation of over 25%. Exchange rate of the cedi is now almost 14 cedis, if not more, to $1, compared to about 4 in 2016. That means workers who earned monthly salary of 1,000 Ghana cedis in 2016 were taking home the equivalent of $250. Today, 1,000 Ghana cedis is only $71 US. The depreciation of the cedi at this monumental scale, that is about 250% depreciation, represents a huge decline in living standards of Ghanaians generally and workers in particular. This is so because of our over-reliance on imported goods such as medicines, refined petroleum products, and food, whose prices are directly affected by the exchange rate of the Ghana cedi in terms of the major international currencies such as the US dollar and the pound sterling. What it means is that if we want our cities to be stable, we should reduce imports and consume what we produce in Ghana. Furthermore, as we all know very well, Ghanaian workers rely on loans to meet very basic necessities such as rent advance and our children's education. And in some cases, we even have to rely on loans for food. Today, we are paying interest rates of 30% to access loans from the banks. In the informal economy, interest rates can even be as high as 50% or even sometimes higher. Our children graduate from the universities and colleges after we have spent so much on them, but they cannot find jobs. And the trouble is that there seems to be no end of this socioeconomic hardship in sight. We were told that an IMF bailout will help, but we know that IMF bailout cannot be a solution to Ghana's economic hardship. The relatively high wage increases we negotiated for workers in the last 2 years have lost their real values. So, comrades, we have a lot of work to do to protect the working people of Ghana. Brother Chairman, let me shift our attention to the theme of this year's May Day celebration, and that is Election 2024, the role of workers and social partners in securing peaceful elections for national development. As in the previous election years,
this is still the Marketplace. Here with me, Pius Kojo Baka. It's a special edition of the Marketplace. We are pausing for a breather. We'll be right back with more. Please stay. Welcome back to the Marketplace. It is a special edition, of course, and we have to bring you that interview granted by the former Finance Minister, Seth Chekwe, in that interaction with my colleague George Yaaah during the IMF spring meetings in Washington, D.C. about the economy. Do enjoy.
It appears that we are coming out of the worst that happened for you as a player in this whole global financial space. Are you comforted by the projections the fund is giving about the outlook for the global economy?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. You lead the fund, and you also lead, other institutions, the African Development Bank in our own case. They are less known. They also do their projections, but invariably, they all come across with the same figures. And then you look to the EU, and other larger economies and what is happening in those economies. And I mention those economies because they tend to be the drivers. So if the US is doing well and the US is growing, and by growth it means that the dollar becomes stronger, right? And ordinarily they want to control the quantitative easing, that is the money that was poured, to ease the effects of COVID. That means that they'll be raising interest rate. On balance, if they raise interest rate, the cost of borrowing is heavy because that is the largest financial market, and therefore it affects borrowing everywhere. If on the other hand, as I said earlier on, the US economy is growing, it means the economy becomes stronger, the dollar strengthens, and when the dollar strengthens, in our case, one commodity, gold, normally suffers in price because it often moves, in the opposite direction of the value of the dollar. I'm explaining this to say that, yes, we could be lifted with the normal growth that is taking place, that is being projected from even China that was slowing down, across the globe, in the strong economies, but we should be mindful of their implications for our economies.
And I get from you that, listen, let's be careful of being excited about the global economy picking up, because that could also come with some shocks for our local economy as well.
Precisely, and that is the essence of where we have to take our economies to understand, the dynamics of the global economy and its effect. So to give you an example, let me add a third one. Currently, because of the Middle East, situation, we have topping the Ukraine-Russian war. You have crude oil prices going up. Okay, in our case, crude oil prices can play both ways. With 3 oil fields, we should be somewhere in the middle of imports and exports. But being mindful of these things explains some of the policies, that are still enshrined in our Petroleum Revenue Management Act. And it says that when the global economy is favoring you, right, when demand is high in the US, your cocoa, chocolate, they eat chocolate or whatever, you benefit from it, right? So you gain. Gold, high, right? And then petroleum, on balance. Put some of the money aside because crises are inevitable. The global economy goes up and it goes down. That is why you have this expression booms and busts. Okay, so it booms and then it busts. And that is because, I mean, if you take the global financial crisis, you know, what was the cause for it? As for natural crises like COVID, it's unpredictable. But global financial crisis, for example, you could see the exuberance, as the then Fed chairman said, the exuberance of the market. You know, it was boiling. So there was a lot of deals. Interest rates was going up. And no matter what, people were doing deals, right? To the extent that they were then the subprime lending to vulnerable groups who could not pay because of, you know, the situation led to a crash of the U.S. economy. So these are the booms and the busts. And so we have to start preparing for these booms and the busts in the economy, in the global economy.
Isn't that coming too late that we should start preparing? Because some are saying that our current petroleum laws, even our budgets, the fiscal situation, all tries to ensure that we put in place stabilization fund, we put in place measures that would help us withstand some of these shocks. And if we have not done that, it raises some serious red flags.
Better late than never. And a second expression, experience is the best teacher. Probably, these are concepts which, let's face it, are not normally, you know, easy to understand in making a transition, right? It may come about because somebody has an exposure. Somebody lived, you know, let's say outside and has seen, you know, how the emerging economies became emerging, how the brick economies became brick. A lot of written about how China moved within 30 years from being a developing country to the second largest economy of the world. What are some of the things that they did? So in our case, when we became middle income as a result of, you know what, services sector.
I think it was just classification, the real middle income thing. We don't have it. It was just numbers when it comes to GDP calculation.
Let's do it in two steps, right? Why did Ghana's GDP grow, right? Remember, we had Vision 2020 all the way back from the Rawlings administration. Vision 2020 said we wanted to become middle income, like Rwanda has it now, okay, on our own. Then His Excellency President Kufuor came, and with the benefits of HIPIC flows and our ability to borrow, right, it turned to Vision 2015. It was seen that we could contract that ambition by 5 years. So we had Vision 2015. Okay. Then it's not out of the blue. It's because the economy, the dynamics, that services sector suddenly overtook agric. Who would have thought? Right? That services sector, because we're not adding value to agric, right? The services sector, that was new to the economy, financial sector, you know, and all these mobile apps and the rest, shot the economy, and it started, you know, expanding and becoming big, right? Then we discovered oil, right? We had to rebase because what we were using to calculate growth, the elements, right? The elements of growth, which is the sectoral indices, were changing. The bigger portion was no longer agric. That's the essence of rebasing. So we rebase, right? So if you take Ghana, is it really a matter of just arithmetic, or there was something real underlying the economy? There were significant real things underlying the economy. My second point is that whether you like it or not, and the reason I take this seriously is that I happen to be the minister who got that letter from the World Bank, and I always say, saying that you have become a middle-income country, and it has implications. You can no longer borrow for 40 years with 10-year moratorium, which means a moratorium 10 years before you start paying, and then you repay over 30 years as we did to build some of the First Republic infrastructure, and continuing. When you become middle-income country, it shortens to 25 years and then 5 years. That's 5 years plus 20, 25, right? It is still concessional, but you must know. So that if we had things right through office, if we had added more, in all probability, Ghana will be shifting gradually towards high-income country. I'm saying one. And then secondly, the development partners begin to remove you of aid. You know that aid is no longer a big element in our revenue generation, right? So you should begin to realize that, hey, something is changing and it will catch up with you in the next 10 years or so, right? We had, as a result of HIPIC, we had exposure to the, we're borrowing anyway, even the concessional financing, and then we started borrowing, doing our own bullets, treasury bills, and later bonds, right? But then still, we had all these help us to get exposure to the capital markets. Despite HIPIC, we have defaulted. So is there something that can cure, right, that issue? Why is Ghana getting debt relief, right? Goes back. Ghana getting, if we had gone for with COVID, we would have had debt suspension, which is what we are having now. But above all, why are we defaulting? So is there something we could do? Given the experience of single spine, HIPIC debt, and the 2007 sovereign bond that were all going to crystallize around 2017, we did a refinancing, and we said, what is it that we are doing with our debt which is bad? And it is that sometimes when we borrow, we pay principal plus interest. But when it comes to treasury bills, and we are still doing it, when it comes to 3-year bonds, when it comes to 2-year notes, when it comes to 5-year bonds, and then when it comes to 10-year bonds, 15-year bonds, we're doing 30 years, right? We were paying interest and deferring the principal, right? That's a bullet. Something should tell you that with the scare that we had with the first sovereign bond, we set up the sinking fund. And in other words, if you look at the graph, the rate of borrowing, which shows your acceleration, started to decline.
But another thing I want to come back to, Honorable, is to get your thought that there have been several schools of thought about the reclassification of our economy that you spoke about. There are some who think that we are undervalued and we are even bigger than what we are. There are some who also think that current developments has exposed the rush and that we hadn't gotten there yet. Which school of thought side do you lean to?
I lean towards those who say, and there are few, it is a reality. Face it and manage it. Because your economy is going to grow. Right now we are saying that tallow might take oil to 100,000 again, right? And if we had done the two, aborted oil first, where would Ghana's GDP be? Even without all this, we said we are going to hit $1 trillion. You remember? It was a big debate. Do we make it a paper trillion? Or we come to the realization that this is for real. Lithium is coming. So is this for real? Right? And therefore, if your GDP is going to grow, whether you like it or not, you don't have an impact on how the World Bank calculates. You can't be an exception to the rule. It's a global, index. And we are going to possibly be an upper middle income country, given our population. Our population is because it's GDP divided by population, right? So if our GDP doubles, right, and divided by the population, the impact is different from if Nigeria's GDP doubles with a larger population, which is about 3 times ours. So every country must have to assess, for him or herself, where we are likely to be going. And these are some of the reasons that we said we come to the realization, if you have had HIPIC, fine, maybe the lesson was not, sufficient enough. But now that we have defaulted, we should take our debt repayment mechanism, by whatever name you call it.
Oh, no, but let's come back. So you highlighted one critical thing in development in the Middle East as well. Are you worried? And there are again two schools of thought. Are you worried about the current development in the Middle East and all those things and the possible impact on the economy? Which I want to pick your thought on that first, and also the bit about whether we have built the required shock absorbers or we haven't. So again, expect the economy to take a shock when things get out of hand. First, on the current development in the Middle East and how that could impact on the Ghanaian economy.
I think again we have to go back to history. As Ghana, go back to when we were not exporting, we hadn't discovered oil. When we had discovered oil, but excuse me, not in commercial quantity. Salt Pond and others came, but we hit commercial quantity. What is it that has changed back then, and what is it that has changed now that we are an oil-producing country? Back then, if crude oil prices rises, you remember in the 70s, OPEC increases prices and it affected globally. It was a major crisis because the prices were high. Are we different? Yes. Why? Because now we can say that even if crude oil prices rises to $100, let me just recently.
That's interaction with my colleague George Yaaah, former Finance Minister Seth Terkper there. Ending the marketplace with me, Pius Kojo Baka. For more stories, do log on to myjoyonline.com/business. I'll see you at 5 p.m. with Business Live. Bye-bye.